really funny story because it's kind of like the history of Griffith a little bit. So I'm first generation Griffith, and my grandfather was English, my grandmother was Australian, my mum's maternal side, and my dad's side were Scottish grandmother, who I get the red hair and the freckles from, and a Welsh grandfather who, being Welsh, was a miner. So he hailed from Ardlethan in the tin mines, and he moved to Griffith and the family. So, and then when my grandmother moved up here, mum's mum, she moved in next door to some Italian migrants, and my grandmother was a chef, and she'd predominantly been working in shearing sheds, probably in the 40s and 50s, and then she moved to Griffith, and so she didn't speak Italian and they didn't speak English, so they spoke to each other through their cooking. And then when Dad and Mum got married and had us, the eldest two children, my sister and I, we got pulled into this big crazy Italian family and were taught how to make salami and wine and drink wine and make risotto and eat risotto. So with cooking training in the good old days, it was French. So the French cooking background with my grandmother, who lived in one house, we lived in another house, and our Italian friends lived in the brick house in the 60s, I guess, when they built it. And we enjoyed sort of the multiculturalism of it all, and we lived a little bit out of town, and in those days they only had one car, so we grew up as little children being thrown into wheelbarrows, squishing grapes with our feet, and drinking it as well, but lots of water went with it as well when we were drinking it as young preschoolers. Actually, I moved from there when I was 4, but we stayed in close contact. So that's how I got into the wine industry.
Cool.
We grew up on Dad's side of the family. They were rice, wheat and sheep farmers, so we often share farmed with my cousin who had rice, wheat and sheep, so we lived in farm homesteads generally. And so part of the sheep thing was that we had to go around the sheep and make sure fences were safe, and then when the shearing came around or the drenching, we were involved with that as like extra labour. So we used to, then I used to roust, and I think the rest of us, maybe not my sister because she was a bit of a girly girl, but my brothers and I used to roust in the sheds. And shearers aren't too different to cellar hands, is what I found. So the swearing, the tough hours, the tough jobs, and sort of the lifestyle, the seasonal lifestyle for vintage and then non-vintage. So I think that I grew up in a man's world basically, so I learned how to navigate, and it wasn't easy, especially with the most of the companies I spent the most time with were Italian-owned companies. So it wasn't just the fact that I was a female, but I was a female in an Italian world, which they're a bit more old-fashioned. My dad didn't treat women different to men really, so that was a bit of a culture shock for me, but I just adapted like you do when you're from the land, I think. So so that was probably, and I think what it was the I think we looked at like I always appreciated what men brought to the table, especially coming from a rural sort of farming background, and men often appreciated what women brought to the table, so we'd had different skills, but one was just as important as the other. And I think at the end of the day, wine was always in the heart of what the wineries did, and they were very, very passionate about making their wines. Even though the best quality of wines without refrigeration wasn't awesome back in the early days, but it got better and better. And I think women really helped to mould that. There's a few local female winemakers who have made a huge impact on quality of wine and winemaking in our region. I think it's one of those things, like, how when you have a really good experience and go to a, you go to an event. To start off with, you're going to an event. So you go to an event and you may not remember what the weather was like, if it was an art show, what the art was like. You might not remember a lot of things, but what you do remember is the memory and the experience that you leave with. Like, you might remember 40, 50 years later that you had your favourite wine at this, art opening, or you might have met your future partner at this art. So you remember something like jumps out, and it's the experience. And I think for me, that's like, I can't separate, I can't delineate. It's like, it's not what it is, it's the feeling that it leaves you with. Like, the feeling you get left with it's so many different emotions and senses and experiences all pulled into one. And for me, wine is at the heart of it. And I'm sure a lot of other people who are involved in wine say the same thing. It's what pumps through our veins. Like, we have wine pumping through our veins. It's like it morphs through us, and I think that's part of it. Like, we're capturing that and then giving it back to people in a format or as an experience back to them, and hoping that they sort of get what we get out of it, that we've tried to deliver to them, the experience that they have when they have a glass of that wine. It's such a tough gig, like I was just sort of saying to my hairdresser, actually, I said, because they're grape growers as well, and I just sort of said to them, I said, it's not, being a winemaker is like, you have so many sleepless nights, because the timing on everything is so important. And I said, so it's like having a newborn baby every single year, so you've got to nurture it, you've got to be there with the right thing at the right time, and like to catch it so it doesn't fall, or to like prompt it to move forward, or whatever it is, whether it's a ferment or whether it's, like getting your grapes in at the right time so you get the right quality. It's pretty awesome, but it's so similar to having a newborn baby every single year. So so hence the dark circles under my eyes. It's called like 40 years of sleep deprivation for 3 to 6 months of the year every year. So depending on what's happening that year. When I started in the wine industry, which was pretty much the start of my adult life, and coming from a farming background, we were responsible for our water, our garbage, our sewerage. We were in a rural area, and we were from a fairly large family and very large extended family. So my mum was one of those people that went around to the farm gates and collected boxes of apples when they were in season, or pears, or mandarins, or oranges. So we lived very, what I call tribally or locally. And then I saw a huge move towards globalization worldwide. Wasn't, because that's what globalization is. So when that was sort of like blowing out of proportion and moving very quickly, like exponentially, I thought, wow, where is this going to end up? Surely, and then of course what we talked about before, everything is cyclical. So you think that what comes up must come down, so the circle must complete itself. So you're thinking, well, there's only one way that it can go. It needs to go back to local or tribal, and to reduce the carbon footprint, basically. They're the new words, but it's the same meaning that it had back from when I was a child or a young adult. So I'm thinking that, so now that's really, there's a lot of evidence that that's the direction we're moving back towards. So it's like, we're aware now, like how much petrol something takes if we transport it, how much, the packaging thing, because that used to always blow my mind. I used to think, my goodness, like you go to do your weekly grocery shop and you come home and you'd have 2 grocery bags full of wasted packaging, and you're thinking, and then it'd just go into the garbage bin if you lived in town. I thought, this is crazy, because we didn't have recycling in those days. So I'm thinking, and then even in the wine industry, like there was a period of time when we used to locally re-wash bottles, and I thought that's such a good idea, because then it's not getting wasted. And then that went out of favour, and so now, and then they re-looked at it as an industry, I think, I'm not 100% certain of the decision makers, but I think they went into then recycling so that we'd return the bottles and they get crushed and then remade into new glass, at least. So that helped a lot and made my conscience feel a lot happier as well as being part of that industry. But there's so many things that are similar to that, and now we've got the sustainable wine, the SWA, the SWA accreditation that most wineries and grape growers and are being involved with and needing to go through those processes. So that's like shining a bigger light on it from probably a higher vantage point. But I think the main thing is that everybody needs to be responsible for what they're doing. And I think the world, the younger generation are really aware of all of that. Like, they're so aware. They sort of ask, well, where does that come from? Who makes it? Why is it made that way? Can it be done more sustainably? What's the carbon footprint on that? So, and I think that just having that awareness is a huge step forward. I mean, it's in different language to what I grew up with, but it's taking us to the same place. And especially when we're shrinking back from a globalization back to living as locally as we can, like eating vegetables that are in season and that are local, going to the markets, so I think that's really, I'm quite an artistic winemaker. To me, it's sort of like having enough of the science plus enough of the art, and then you have a vision on where you can slot this parcel of wine into, or this truck of fruit, like a truck of wine grapes, into making a specific product. So I think you really do need to, and I'm sure most winemakers, I think there's a few that are more just highly technical and they don't have the artistic sort of vent or lane that they sort of go down. But I think you need to be quite a visionary, because it's not just one truck of grapes or one paddock of grapes to one product. It's where that fits into 12 months of production in a 6 to 12 week period of the year, every year, which we get. And then how that fits into what's going on in our industry, who our consumers are, what they like to consume, what nuances they like within the products that we're making. In other words, like how high in alcohol, or how sweet, or how fruity, or which varieties they would sort of prefer, and how they want them finished off. So I think, and as winemakers, we love getting in our heads of the people who are drinking our wine, so that we get better and better. That's why I really enjoy doing the sales support sort of stuff, where you get out there and talk to the people who are actually drinking it. I've spent most of my career doing, I started off doing flavoured and fortified wines, being largely in charge of that, which was a really big learning curve. And the funny thing is, I'm sort of getting back into the fortified end of things at the moment, which is like spirit production for ports, etc. My forte is, there's two things. I work really hard during the fermentation part of the process, and from the vineyard through to ferment, so that the grapes get the best opportunity to shine and to represent what they used to look like as grapes in the paddock. So what you want wine that tastes really similar to when you go and taste the grapes in the paddock. That's what it tastes like, except it's now preserved because it's got the alcohol in there so it's not just a 6-week period when you can eat it from the vineyard. So, and then you can preserve it and drink it for many years, if depending on which variety it is, for 1 year or many years, depending on what it is. So I think that's really important. So I think I've got a real knack at nailing that. I think I do quite a good job at that. The other thing is, because largely I've spent the bulk of my career in commercial wineries, is having the every drop of wine in your establishment being the best it can be, and so that it's saleable. So every drop of wine, so that way you manage your cost, and that's what you want. Like even cask wine, you want it to be the best cask wine that cask wine drinker is going to drink. So that's what we spend our energy and time doing. And then your iconic wines, you want them to be the best they can be, so that you've got something you can be really proud of to go and it's your showcase. And then the other thing that my particular strength, I think, is finishing wines off. So when they're in bulk wine tanks and they're about to go to bottling, we finish them off. We tweak them a little bit here, tweak them a little bit there, and this is where we capture from the minds of our consumers which way we sort of zig and zag at that process. And I think that's a real knack that I have, and using like very, very small amounts of very high quality additives like tannins and oaks. I think that's something that is my strength as well. I think when you've done as many vintages as I've done, it's very cyclical. So you sort of circular, you know, like it goes around and around. So you sort of, but it's never the same. It's never the same. So you get hints and instruction from your successes and your failures, like from previous years, whether they're yours or someone else's. Because I think as a winemaking community, we love to share the love of wine. So we often talk with other winemakers about how we do things and why we do it, or why we do it this way, not that way. So we share a lot of information, I think, organically. But then you've got to interpret that and apply it in your engineering setting, because we chemically engineer our wine. Once it hits the winery, everything goes through the engineering of that site. I actually get really, really chuffed when the wine that I produce, or we produce as a team, depending on the setting, is represents the grapes that were grown on the vine, and then we're just showcasing that, we're enhancing that, we're bringing it home. Basically, it tastes as awesome as if that was, it tastes like that Shiraz that I had from that block, or it tastes like that Chardonnay that I had from that block, and it's got some really lovely subtle oak coming through just to highlight, you know, those flavors, and like with the reds as well. So I think that's really that's an awesome aspect, and it's sort of, you get a lot of personal satisfaction from that, and also the satisfaction of your team that's around you as well. I was working for a company, and they were in the throes of they were under administration, so they're in the throes of not being in existence anymore. And it was a family-owned company, so it meant a lot. And I'd been there at this stage for about 15 years, and I was heavily pregnant with my third child. And so what we did was, we said, if we come out of, and so we're down to a minimum staff, so I was sleeping in the car and eating Macca's hamburgers, but my daughter's tall and thin, so it didn't have an impact on her too much, so in a bad way. So basically what we said, we need something, a point of difference to come out the other end. So I think I might have been one of the first people in Australia to make an Amarone styled wine, which is a sun-dried wine. So so here I was, because we had no staff, pushing, one of the aspects of this wine was we had one of our grape growers had prunes as well, so we had a prune drying kiln. So we loaded up the fruit onto the trays, and I was pushing, I think I was about 8 months pregnant, pushing trays of fruit into prune kilns to dry out one component, because I hadn't made it before, so we did 3 different components. Then we dried some, which is the traditional way of making it, where they actually went out and cut the cordons. But what I did was I picked some really old vines. They were about 65 years old, and I just let them dry naturally on the vine. So that was the second component. And then the third component was where we laid Hessian bags down in the field. And I did a lot of this stuff for myself. I didn't do it all, but I did a lot of it myself because we had no staff. So this is probably, and so I went and I think the farmer actually organised someone to cut the fruit for me. In fact, now I think of it, I'm sure he did. And so I used to get the fruit out of the buckets and lay it on the Hessian bags and let it dry that way. So then we made 3 separate components of wine from these 3 components, and then we did a tasting up for it, and then we blended to get one blend, and we called it Amarone styled wine. So, we actually called it sun-dried Shiraz at the time. So, And it did really well and it won some awards. And unfortunately, the company did fold virtually. It was bought out by a management group, but the management group then still took this wine forward as they move forward. So it was that was pretty awesome. I mean, that was one moment, but really stood out because of the personal pain. There's a lot more innovation in winemaking at the moment, and there's a lot of products that are supporting making wines greener. So I think that's really I think it's really important that we embrace that, and I think most winemakers are, because number one, it saves money, but number two, so oftentimes it's actually better for the wine. Because once upon a time, people never drank wine the way as commercially as what we do. They would have had, like in Italy now, they still, when it's vintage time, they just drink juice out of a jug it's not filtered, it's full of all the solids and, a bit sort of like what the craft beers do now. There's a lot of solids in it, where we clean most of that out in most wines. So that traditionally wasn't how wine was consumed, so we want every bottle to look the same from, for the whole 12 months basically, which is most of the time how long you're packaging it for. So I think the thing with a lot of like techniques, clever additives, like smarter and more specific yeasts and enzymes, and getting away from like animal proteins and moving towards vegetable proteins is so that we sort of it's lighter on the carbon footprint as well. That's important as well. So there's a lot of change that way. So I think you probably can't do one without the other. And I think traditional winemaking for me has always been minimalist, because I was taught by Italians how to make wine in the shed, or plonk. We used to call it plonk, make plonk in the shed. So basically, they used to the only additive that they used to add was sulfur to finish after malolactic fermentation had occurred on reds. That's it. Like even on their whites, they didn't add sulfur. And then because of that understanding that they did minimal additives, when I used to make wine, I used to be really hesitant to use sulfurs. I'd often use tannins because they're derived from grapes, either like seeds or skins. So that way, that helps preserve the wine without having something that's not wine going into wine, So that was my philosophy from being like a 3 and 4 year old child being thrown into a wheelbarrow squishing grapes, you know what I mean, to make plonk in the shed, So I think, to me, it's just a marriage. Like we've got that understanding, we've got that love, we've got that passion, we've got that, we want our industry to be sustainable, we want it to move forward, but really everything old is new again. That's the way I look at it, and that's my roots. So I always go back to that. Well, what would I have done? Why am I adding this? Or do I need to add this? So I think that's, especially when I ask myself that 1,000 times before I add anything that's not grape or like if it's an oak additive that's from a good quality oak, On our own vineyard, we do minimal everything. And like what I was sort of saying, if it's not grape, then why are we adding it? So we've always sort of run our farm a lot more labour intensive than like a lot of vineyards. And that's carried through into the way I make wine as well. Like I really only like to add things if I really need to, and at the absolute, at the time when it really has to be added. So if it's not grape or grape derived, then it's something that I question heavily whether I'm going to add it. So I think that it has to be sustainable if you do it that way. And also like the other thing is the mentality is, how can I do this smarter, not harder? And keeping that in line with sustainable practices, because that's always a goal, it has been right from when I started making wine. I think just being aware of the carbon footprint is really important here, because basically most of that's out of our control. Largely it's out of our control. If we're taking responsibility for our personal action and what footprint we're leaving on the planet in our lifetime, and that's at the front of our mind, and that includes what we're doing day to day, which is, if you're a winemaker, it's making wine, and nurturing wine, then I think that the rest of it has to take care of itself. You just have to have faith that the humans are smart and things are going to be corrected and things aren't going to get as bad as what some people say it's going to be. And we have to believe that, because otherwise why would we get up in the morning if we thought that the world's going to come to an end tomorrow because of the hole in the ozone or whatever it is that you're talking about? Like, I mean, I think you just have to have faith that, you know, the world's a great place. You be as responsible as you can for the impact that you're leaving on the planet, the footprint you're leaving on the planet, and you instill that in your children as best you can, you know, and if you're a winemaker, your team around you as best you can, and then you just keep moving. Like, I don't know how else to answer that, because it's a really big question, and the youth of today are actually really quite depressed about it. Like, we're depressing them. Like, it's like, I've got children, and it's like, especially my 23-year-old, it really upsets me how upset she gets about people talking negatively about the evolution of mankind and the planet, when they're so cautious of everything that they consume, you know, like how they consume it, you know, like it's really, we really need to be careful of our words, like on what we're on fear that we may be instilling, that we don't know if it's going to happen or when it's going to happen. It's most likely not going to happen in our lifetime. So let's have a little bit of faith and hope. You know, like, wineries are doing the best they can for the best part of it, and I think a lot of them would be saying, I'm doing my best, but I intend on doing it better, you know, and hence the soir as well. So I think that basically, yeah, I think we just need to try to do better, you know, and I think that's why you get out of bed every day anyway, is to do something better or smarter than what we did previously and learn from other inputs. This message really needs to get out there, because we have got such good growers in Griffith, and we've got such awesome soils, and we're getting better and better at viticulture, and because basically we're making wine from grapes. Grapes are part of viticulture, so without good grapes we can't make good wine. And I think that we really need to shine a really bright light on Griffith and just sort of say, look, this is why we're awesome. Like, we are awesome. We want the world to know we're awesome, you know. So, and we really stack up there especially in certain areas where we just do so well, you know, like in certain price points, in certain varieties, in, you know, like we've got Malbec on our vineyard now, and because my husband sort of said, oh, we're looking at planting some more grapes a few years ago, what do you think we should grow? And I said, well, Giriffe is doing awesome in Griffith, and I love the colour of it. So I said, I think that's a really strong attribute from a warmer climate, that you have good colour easily from the grape. It doesn't crop very high either, which I think is really important for a warmer climate. And it's got really good tannins that last a long time, so you can like drink it relatively early, and you can put it down for a long time if you're one of those people, and it's a great wine to do that from a warm climate, where you get full ripeness and full flavour in your wines, which I think is awesome, especially when you start looking at wines where they don't get full ripeness or full flavour and they have to chaptalize and add sugar because the acid is so high. So we're really sitting on a winner, I think, in Griffith and surrounds. And so back to the Malbec. So with Malbec, I was thinking, because of our Italian influence in Griffith, that an Italian red might be nice. But I've been making Italian wines probably for about 20 years now, and I thought, and then I sort of thought, but I don't know if I'm invested enough to actually plant any of them, because we didn't have a strong sort of directive from a winery that how invested they were in it. So that sort of worried me a little bit. And then so I sort of thought, well, okay then. So I went and started tasting reds that were good in our climate, and I came across Malbec. So I tasted some from all around the world, and tasted some local ones, went and had a look at the vineyards from some local ones, and I thought, wow, this is a great grape, and it's got such a vibrant red colour, and it's great in sangria, and it's great in as a standalone wine. And the tannin profile and the ripeness and the fruit profile of it is wonderful. And I think it really, it's going to do really well in Griffith. So we invested in that, and so far I think it looks pretty good. It's an unusual grape. It's actually quite rubbery. So it's sort of like, so when you go to pick it, it's sort of like, no, you can't pick me. It's sort of, when you're picking them off by hand just to do tastings or Beaumet tests or whatever. And Chardonnay, thank goodness it's sort of bounced back, because it's such a strong varietal, and Griffith does it so well. Like, you get full ripeness, you get different clones on different soil types, cropping at different levels. You get the whole gamut of flavours and styles. You get unoaked, lighter, lower alcohol styles, which are really like more in a Sauvignon Blanc sort of lane, which are tighter and crisper. And then you get sort of the ones that are sort of in the middle, where they're melony and with a bit of citrus, and but full flavoured, and a little bit of passion fruit often, which just sort of like finishes the flavour profile of it. And then you get sort of the really rich ones, which are thankfully back in fashion now, with the higher alcohol and the beautiful sort of subtle, cedary oak on them, and they're full of flavoured, higher alcohol, really you can drink them in winter with a roast if you like white wine instead of a red wine, So I think there's just, and then I could go on. The Pinot Grigio is doing really well in Griffith, or Pinot Gris. And I think, the flavour profiles, the apples and pears, it does, they're magnificent wines, and you don't have to think too much. Like a Pinot Gris, that's what it's for. You're standing at a bar, because I first got introduced to it in London, and they just sort of said to me, oh, we're going to make Pinot Gris. We're getting them from the nursery, and we're going to have a crack at making it. So I got one email saying, this is how you make Pinot Gris. And I just went, oh, Pinot Grigio. And I went, oh, okay then, that's really interesting. And so we had a crack, and we did a really good job. So you get beautiful apples and pears, and sort of a little bit of sort of spice in there as well. And so we sort of got the grapes and we made it, and it's just getting better and better. So basically we were standing in a bar, and they said, no, the London girls don't want to eat anything. Because most of it was fish and chips or something like that, and it was often cooked in lard still in those days in the pubs. It was terrible. And then anyway, so they wanted to stay thin, so they wouldn't eat. And so they'd just be standing there drinking Italian Pinot Grigio. So then they said, no, this is going to be the new trend. So off we went. We started making Pinot Grigio, and Griffith does it really, really well. So it's a lovely wine. You don't have to think too much. It's tasty. It's lower in alcohol. It finishes quite short a lot of the times. So it's just sort of in your mouth, and and in and out, and you can sort of keep chatting with your friends and whatever. You don't have to think too much about it. It's just a lovely little wine that you can just drink without food if you want to do that. So our region is famous for De Bortoli's make equal to the best botrytized Semillon in the world, which is no small feat. That really shines a light on Griffith. And that's you have to get enough flora in your paddock and it has to be in the right position, so that I used to make it at the winery I worked at, so I fully understand how difficult it is, and it's for the long game, because you've got to get enough flora in your paddock, and then seasonally, depending on the season, you need moist conditions where the noble rot perfectly works on the skins of the berries, and reduces them and concentrates the flavour and adds its own flavour from the noble rot. And it's a delicacy worldwide, and it's sort of something, it's iconic, and Griffith does it equal to the best in the world. That's not to be sneezed at, really. That's an awesome attribute for largely De Bortoli's have driven that over the years, and they've done a magnificent job of it. Largely it was a very male dominated, and men, it was I think taken for granted that men could do everything better in a winery than what a woman could, when I was sort of first introduced to it. So I think the thing is that I really look at men and women as being equal, really. You know what I mean? And I always the act as if, because that's what I always aspired to. But we're just different. Like, we're different. So in saying that, when any young person who has a passion for wine and puts their seat in the chair, because that's the thing, like, a lot of people can sort of say the words, but it's a tough industry and it's a tough gig, and it's year after year after year, you know, because to get good at it, you've got to keep doing it over and over again to go through those cycles. So I think the thing is that largely I always tried to take the high road, basically. So if it was, for women coming through, I'd sort of give them a cheat sheet. I'd say, look, this is the cheat sheet. If it's advice, you don't have to take it, but this is a cheat sheet on if you want to if you want to get seen for the amount of work you do and how hard you work, then this is some advice I can give you. You know what I mean? But in saying that, but I would do the same thing probably for men, like for males coming through as well. I'd just sort of say, you know, this is how we work in, everyone's part of the team, let's sort of do it together. And like when I was in charge, I'll make sure that it's any sort of accolades are distributed where they need to be, you know. So if you do well, you will get rewarded. If you do well, so it really wasn't to do with sex so much, but generally speaking, sort of probably 20, 25 years ago, you had to sort of like help, or make a more comfortable place at my own expense a lot of the time for women coming through, so that they would want to stay in the industry. You know what I mean? I think that was the thing. You had to find them a bit more of a nurturing space, because it was so difficult and it was such a hard career. And, you know, there's consumption of alcohol worldwide is reducing, and wine seems to be particularly hard hit in this. So it's tough times for everyone. I remember the most optimistic, and usually with optimism comes success. So, and once again, we're back in cycle. So you would think that because times are so tough at the moment, that the moving forward would be that times are going to get better again at some point. And my most optimistic time in the wine industry was when everybody had their place in the team to play. I think the future of women in winemaking is pretty much women have taken it into their own hands, actually. So basically my thoughts on that is that women have often different strengths than male winemakers, and I think it's adding its own dimension. And I think it's past the point of being the beginning of that. I think we're well and truly into women owning their own destiny and shaping their own future, depending on what their passion and interest is in what lane they sort of take in their winemaking career, whether it's corporate, getting their own label going, consulting, boutique, whatever lane they sort of take. I mean, what their passion is, because basically you're going to end up where you're passionate about, you know, like, so, you know, like some people it's cool climate, making sort of 2,000 litres a year, you know, or other people it might be being really good at being able to churn out 55 to 60,000 tonnes of good quality wine in a year, like being there. So often most people get into our industry by doing a vintage, and often that's you start usually either in the weighbridge, in the cellar, or in the lab, you know. So, or maybe it might even be doing berry collection, you know, doing Beaumets in vineyards, collecting, you know, samples out of vineyards. So any of those things are really good ins, because you get a taste of the industry. And then it's a matter of, and one of the good things about starting in the lab, which would probably be my preference of if you were going to have a crack at doing something, to start in the lab, is because that's the heart of the winery. Basically, you need to know all the processes, what's going on. You get to see the technical side of wine because you're analysing wine. And I think that it's like lifting up in a drone and just looking at the whole thing from a distance, and then you can come back down and decide which lane you're probably more suited to, and have a second crack at it and then see if you like it. And then maybe get online and start studying it as well, so that you and in most wineries, especially commercial wineries, they have a lot of, SOPs. So you get a really good feel of what each process and procedure and pump and your machine does by just reading SOPs, which are safe operating procedures, where the expert at whatever that is, whether it's running a pump or running a machine in the lab, the experts have written those SOPs, so you get, and they're designed so that someone that hasn't ever operated that machine can read this SOP and with a bit of guidance can have a crack at actually running it. So I think familiarising yourself with the technology and the processes and procedures is really important. Maybe a connection to Mother Earth, I think, because like what I said, when we make wine, or like at the front of my mind when I'm making wine, I'm just preserving, so it lasts longer than 6 weeks, the grapes that are on that vine. So that grower has made the grapes to the best of their ability. And in Griffith, we've got really passionate grape growers and we've got really passionate winemakers, so the grapes come from the vineyard. They get made into a wine, whether it's a Chardonnay, a Shiraz, a Cabernet, a Durif, whatever it is, a Sauvignon Blanc, whatever it is. And then that person, and I've had this feedback when I've done like trade shows and stuff, the person actually can start feeling what you're feeling. It's like you're just getting a bit of energy up from Mother Earth, and she's coming to you through the passion of that grower, through the passion of that winemaker, through the passion of God who made the grapes and gave us the gifts to be able to make the wine, and then you're getting a little tiny snippet of that, and if that enhances you having an engagement party or having a drink at the pub on a Friday night with your besties or whatever it is, it really resonates with what experience, it leaves you with that experience and that memory of that it's adding to that experience.